Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Freedom for Wild Horses. I am very excited to have today Christine Kman. She's the president of Chasing Horses Wild Horse Advocates, and she has been working very hard to save the wild horses of Theodore Roosevelt National Park. And that's what we're going to be discussing today, what actions you can take to help save these horses. So, Christine, I wanted to start by asking you how you got involved with the wonderful wild horses of Theodore Roosevelt National Park.
Well, my husband and I moved here in 2016. We moved here from Illinois. I was working for a big box retailer and I had a 2-year contract to come to North Dakota. So our plan was to be here for 2 years and go back to North Dakota where the rest of, or back to Illinois where the rest of our family is. And I think within 6 months, we fell in love with North Dakota. We fell in love with the park. And of course, we fell in love with the horses. And as we started exploring more and, asking questions, we started wondering things like, why are they taking all the babies out of the park every year? Um, what is Kman? Why are they giving horses birth control? And then trying to educate ourselves in that way. And something that a lot of people don't know is, and what we say honestly, the park has had a plan to eliminate these horses really from the minute that they realized they were fenced into the park back in the 40s and 50s, and they've been trying to get rid of them. It seems like in people I've talked to throughout this process will tell me who've been here for a while, every 10 or 20 years or so, it seems like the park goes through, a push to try to get rid of the horses. In 1978, they did their last environmental assessment, which is, I don't even know if it's worse than this one or not. It's pretty bad, but um, in there they say, and it's almost like a memo to future park staff, we don't recommend ever completely eliminating the horses from the park because public outcry and local pressure is so great. And here we are, right?
Right.
So what people also don't understand, I think, about this park is a couple things. From 2016 when we were here until 2019, they have probably rounded up, I would say between 200 and 300 horses aged 4 months old to 3 years old, and auctioned them off to the highest bidder.
Mm,
So when you're culling all of the babies and you're leaving an older herd, what's going to happen?
they die off.
Right. It seems very simple to us. And when we would ask questions, people would tell us, other organizations would say, we don't question the park. The park knows what they're doing. Well, yes, the park knows what they're doing. They're eliminating this herd of horses. So we feel like they just made their public announcement in December, right? They've been doing this all along. We got lawyers. We started asking questions. We formed our nonprofit. Um, the story of how we came to be is we started taking pictures when we were going out to the park. And then what do you do with all the pictures? Well,
Right.
so we started putting them on Facebook. We created a page mostly for our friends and family back in Illinois to see, what the heck we were doing in North Dakota. And today we have over 100,000 people following us on social media. And that grew into a small business. So we've got a store in Medora right down the street from the park. And then as our small business grew, people kept asking us, like, what do we do to stop the roundups? What do we do to stop the Gonacon? And since the other nonprofit groups that advocate for these horses were supporting the park and helping them find homes, we thought it was important that someone was actually a voice for the horses. So the other thing that's been going on, and this I'm sure everyone can relate to now, in 2009, Colorado State University came in and started working with Theodore Roosevelt National Park on literally experimenting on our horses with Gonacon. That was supposed to be a 4-year study. It went on for 11 years. So we do know, because records are starting to come out now, and we have like little horse talks and stuff too. We did talk to um, Dr. Dan Baker, who was actually pretty transparent and very forthcoming and said a lot of really interesting things. But um, what was upsetting us most was in a FOIA request that American Wild Horse Campaign got, it was noted that in 2009, they hand injected 25 mares with Gonacon. 4 years later, they hand injected them again. And to date, well, as of when the study ended, the experiment in 2020, I believe. So 11 years. So I think 7 years boosted vaccination, 19 of those 24 mares had not returned to fertility.
Right.
So I do know that a couple of them have, but we also knew from the American Wild Horse Campaign FOIA that there was a lot of interest in those 19 mares to try to figure out why, and they were hoping that the park would extend, research on that. And so that seems like that's irritating as an advocate, right? But what Dr. Baker had actually said was they were trying to find out how long would it be before they returned to fertility.
If
And
they
some of
ever,
them,
if ever, of course.
right. And like I said, some of them are. And so then when you look at what the park is doing, because the park is now, they made a statement that said every female horse 8 months old and up was going to be treated with Gonicon. And when we had a meeting with them in July, they said, well, we're not giving every female horse. I said, we know what you say on your website, right? Your website says every female horse. So they assured us that
Right.
they are not doing every female horse and they are doing 2-year boosters. When I asked, they wouldn't answer, but I would assume that since Blake McCann, our director of resource management, worked with Dr. Baker, this is a combination that had a reversible effect. They wouldn't confirm that, but I said, unless you're going to tell me you're just pulling vaccine boosting out of the sky, which, we know the park is very dead set on using science, right? So the BLM, though, is doing capturing horses, giving them Gonicon, and then boosting them at 30 days. And Dan Baker said there's no science to support that. He also said, as he
Right.
talked,
Right. They're using now. This is the new thing. They're decided to use Gonicon on all the herds, even the
right,
ones that had been maintained well on PZP, like the McCullough Peaks herd.
right. So it seems like they're trying to get that 19 of 24 result, but they're not using any of the science that he used to
Mm,
get that. And none of the science supports that. And when I said to him, it was very shocking because as I listened to him talk, I said, the only thing I could think is you sound almost like a Dr. Frankenstein scenario, right? You created something that you thought would help manage wild horse herds. And I will admit, I know that there's a lot of controversy over birth control and PZP and Gonicon, but I could respect having watched, I think it's been 7 or 8 mares die giving birth, older mares die giving birth, and of course their babies die. Where if there was a mare who was well represented genetically, her genes were well represented in the herd, to keep 18, 19, 20-year-old mares from dying while giving birth, I wouldn't have a problem with that. It's the lack of transparency, I think, for all of us in wild horse advocacy that really upsets us. So when I said to him, I feel like you're like a Dr. Frankenstein, right? You came along, worked on something, hoping it had a good result to help and be a tool in wild horse advocacy. And now you have the BLM and Park Service kind of going rogue. And he said that's a very accurate analogy. And I was very surprised. So those are things to challenge. And so we were asking those questions. The Gynecon with the combination of the DART delivery system they're using, and they admitted they were perfecting it to go out west to the Western Range because
right.
they could get close to our horses. So they need something more powerful. Well, when they were doing that at short distance here, it was creating horrible abscesses on the mares that were like
Yes.
weeping and bleeding. And so, yeah, all of that got to be concerning. So we started talking to American Wild Horse Campaign. We have been working with Eubanks and Associates, trying to find out what can we do to get them to come up with a management plan because they need one,
An
and
actual management plan,
an actual management plan,
not an eradication plan.
right? So that's where we are now. So last March they came out with their, I don't know, pre-scoping, and then
Right.
they came out with their scoping notice in December saying that their plan was to eliminate all the horses. Now it seems like they're doing a lot of sleight of hand. I mean, let's be honest. Now it's not a livestock management plan anymore. It's a livestock plan. Um, and it seems like they're trying to shift the focus from, we haven't made a decision. Well, you told us in December what your preferred alternative was. It was elimination of the horses. Like we forget, right? Like we're 2-year-olds with a 2-second memory. Like we remember, plus you have it on your website. Your proposed action is elimination of the horses. So,
Which they
so yeah,
classified as livestock, which has not been
correct.
done anywhere in the Park Service or the BLM before.
Correct. And I also just found someone shared with me a post on Theodore Roosevelt National Park's website in 2016 where they talk about how they at one time thought that the horses were runaway, from other local ranches. And there was a big push in the 70s to try to get rid of the horses. But since then, like they've embraced the horses as a historic demonstration herd. Well, what happened to that?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I
so
was
we don't,
reading I was reading the history that you had posted on your website of the horses in the park, and it's like a horror novel.
it
What
is.
what they have done to these poor horses over time is just horrendous. The roundups, the killing, it's horrendous. It's not what you want to have happen to wild horses.
Well, I think it's also worth noting that in this environmental assessment, they have said they will be going back to helicopter roundups to round up any horses from now going forward. And if horses are placed on GSA auctions, which is a government surplus website where none of the buyers are vetted, there's no follow up. So if they don't sell on GSA auctions, they'll just be euthanizing the horses. So, in case you weren't upset enough about the environmental assessment that came out, they're going to go back to week-long helicopter roundups on the horses, and they'll just euthanize any of the horses that don't sell.
There was something I wanted to ask you about the EA, which is just a mess as far as I'm concerned. I was reading through it, and it seems like the no action alternative really isn't no action because aren't they saying they're going to take it down to 35 to 60 horses is the no action alternative and leave them?
Right. So that goes back to the 1978 environmental assessment. And if you look at, there's a couple things. If you look at the 1978 environmental assessment, it's not based on any science whatsoever. And to add to it, the Department of the Interior sent a BLM range specialist out to the park in 1978 to see if there was another option that could be given to the horses in this park. That BLM range specialist report is actually on the back. It's stapled to this EA, and he debunked everything in there. You can have a lot more horses. These horses are not inbred. They're the healthiest herd of horses I've ever seen. I mean, he went on and on. There's more than enough forage here. I just see plentiful forage. And they didn't listen to him then either. But the real telling thing is that if you look at the last 2 pages of the EA, it talks about alternatives considered. So this is things that the public said during the last public comment period, but dismissed.
Right.
And if you look on there, they're not going to allow a genetically viable herd. They're not going to allow a reproductive herd. They're not going to allow a non-reproductive herd. They're not going to allow a combination reproductive, non-reproductive herd. They're not going to move the herd to the Elkhorn Ranch area. They are not allowing horses to stay in any capacity. But if you look at the reproductive, like the reproductive herd that they're not allowing, it reads exactly the same as Alternative A. So, Theodore Roosevelt National Park, are you engaged in an objective NEPA process? We think no.
Right.
Very
Right.
clearly no.
And
We found
you're asking for an environmental impact study also to be done.
correct, correct,
And so many times in other EAs, this needs to be done and it isn't done by the BLM.
right,
Yeah.
right. So I do think that we're poking a lot of holes in this EA. So, for example, the Theodore Roosevelt National Park is literally in the town of Medora.
Mm,
So small business owners, and we're a small business owner in Medora. So we've been talking to people in the community. We've been to the Medora City Council meetings. They're all concerned. They all know this is all we heard all summer. If the horses aren't here, I won't be back. If the horses aren't here, I won't be
right.
back. I'm here this year. This was very sad all summer. I'm here this year because I'm afraid they won't be here next year. And there's a good chance they won't be if they get their way.
Right.
So they're supposed to look at the economic impact of what their decision is going to do. Well, they came back saying they made a statement in their EA, and this was like the first skim through with our lawyers when it was released. We were kind of talking on the phone, and they have a line in there that says, in 2020, a survey was released saying that only 49% of visitors to the park support maintaining an ongoing horse herd at the park.
Right.
So now, if you say that, it seems like 51% of people who visited then opposed the horses, right? So
Right.
my lawyer was like, we need to get this report. So we asked for the report. The park has since downloaded 80 different documents to their website, and which is why we asked
After
for
after the comment period
a week
had
after,
started. Yeah,
right?
right,
So this is why we had asked for a comment. But when you look at this Brownlee report, um, they don't tell you that there's varying degrees of support:
right,
strongly support, somewhat support, and just support. And if you take those 3 degrees together, 89% of people want the horses to stay in the park and only 4% oppose.
right, right,
So what we're telling our followers is we've been looking for some kind of quantitative data, right? And this, well, the park gave it to us, right? Because they vetted this resource. This also creates controversy, which we're hoping will lead to them having to do an environmental impact statement.
right. And I noticed I did read that, and it was from 2021. There wasn't anything from 2022 or 2023. Obviously, we would like to see that as well,
Right,
because that would be important.
correct. We don't believe that they have taken the hard look that NEPA requires at the environmental impact. So we're hoping that that's what people will put in their comment period. And then all of the
And then you
analogies
have
that,
and you have really good talking points. So we're going to have a link on my website to the talking points, so that you can get some help on commenting on the EA, because frankly, when I was reading the EA, it was a lot, and it was very confusing, and it's very poorly written. So it definitely helps to have some ideas of what needs to be said.
well, the other thing is that when we have a link to this on our website, and I keep referring to it, and I don't know if I put it into our library section, but I am. When we asked for documents, the park dumped all these documents in.
Right,
There's a document called NPS 2022H like horse. This is actually notes from a meeting that the Park Service had last October with key people in the National Park Service at a state, regional level, with the people who are doing the environmental assessment, and their lawyer from the Department of the Interior, pretty much letting you know everything they discussed. And they discussed a lot of topics on, if people say this, then this is what we say. If people say this, then this is what they say. And it literally says in there, how do we connect the dots for the public to make them understand, like, why we're getting rid of the horses? That document has since disappeared. I know everyone's shocked.
of course.
Um, and when they were asked at their civic engagement meeting, which is, of course, only like us sitting here on a computer screen, right? No one can ask me questions. No one can ask follow-up questions. We just have to listen to their scripted rhetoric. So they were asked what happened to it, and it was a mistake for that to be up there. It was an internal document that should not have been shared. So we're telling the public we have that document. I downloaded everything on that page because we've been here, done that before, and we know things disappear. So if they don't want you to read it, everyone should read it. And you'll be even more outraged than you are when you read the EA. But it's almost like, I guess, like the cliff notes that go along with the EA and how they got to those points in the discussion that went on behind the scenes without any public being represented.
So I know that you've retained a law firm, Eubanks and
Yes.
Associates. So are they going to bring a lawsuit, or are they mainly advising you at this point?
They're advising us, and they'll continue to advise us. They're helping us with, they've helped us with our last comment periods. They're going to help us with this comment period. We will be jointly writing our comments in with American Wild Horse Campaign.
Great.
Um, and when the time comes, when we keep telling people, if they do suggest, when we get to the finding of no significant impact, if they don't go on with an environmental impact statement, if they advise that we have reason for litigation, we are 100% ready to take this as far as we need to. We only get one chance to save these horses. If these
Right.
horses are removed from the park, they will never return. They will never return.
Right. So yes, so just to let people know, basically the whole process is they will first release a scoping document, which the public can comment on, then an environmental assessment, which again, the public can comment on. And then the third step is the finding of no significant impact decision record, which they publish, which lets you know what they're going to be doing. And usually they say when. So that will be the next step after the comment period for the environmental assessment is over.
Unless they do an environmental impact statement, which we're
Right.
hoping they will. And we do think that the controversy now over the economic impact, because they're saying that there'll be little to no economic impact if they take the horses out. Well, your own study shows that there will.
Yes,
So we think they do need to do an environmental impact statement. If I mean, aside from the fact of how could removing 200 horses from a landscape not have any impact, but this creates controversy. And I do think that they should do an environmental impact statement. And that's something too,
absolutely.
again, we'll talk to our lawyers about if we try to force that hand. We also are very fortunate, and I know this is and I get asked a lot about this. The entire state of North Dakota is advocating with us, from the governor to our legislators. Senator Hoeven has been great. Senator Kramer and Representative Armstrong also are supporting keeping the horses in the park. The town of Medora, the Medora Foundation that pretty much runs the town of Medora, they're all on board wanting the horses to
That's
stay in the park.
wonderful. That's
So
wonderful.
we even have, and this is, and I don't think we talk about this enough, the North Dakota Stockmen's Association is advocating for the horses staying in the park.
Wow.
So yes. So I mean
So,
that's
and
not said enough.
people don't think about this, but the Department of Interior is over the Park Service, so the National
Correct.
Park Service. So the BLM is under the Department of the Interior as well. So it's basically the Department of Interior that is managing these horses and has the final
Correct.
say is the problem. So the state only has the amount of influence as the federal government allows it to have.
I'm not sure if that's really true, and that's something that we're looking at very hard right now. Our North Dakota legislators, this is some things that I've learned along the way. Our North Dakota legislators unanimously, like 100%, passed a resolution this year asking the park to keep the horses. When we started that process and started that journey, there were a lot of legislators who didn't want to do anything because they were like, this is the state asking the federal, we're not going to win. But
Mm,
truthfully, when I went to Washington, D.C. for the Save Our Wild Horses conference, we lobbied Congress and went to over 200 congressional offices, passing out as much paperwork as we could while we were there. And a lot of those staff members for different congressmen said that piece of that document saying our state resolution and that the state was behind us was a very powerful tool in our toolkit, because truthfully, the federal government should not be telling any state what to do. So this is also, again, like when you break up the fight, it's a whole huge fight. It's a huge government overreach, right? This is something that Theodore Roosevelt National Park is the #1 tourist destination for the state of North Dakota. And we know, even before this Brownlee study that they gave us that supported, gave us the quantitative facts, we know people are coming to see the horses.
yes.
We had a rally in July, and I had a lot of wild horse advocates who normally go out to the Western Range, and they've never been to the park. They came here to see the horses, and they said, this is different. This is very unique, and it's an amazing opportunity. Um,
Oh,
so
tell me a little bit about what it's like being out there and seeing the horses.
it's just amazing. And they go to different places in different times of the year, but when you can just sit in nature and just, when you see the horses, a lot of them will be like, kind of, want to check you out, make sure that you're okay, you're not going to hurt them, not going to be darting them with Gonacon or whatever. But once they know that you're not a threat, and if you just sit there and watch them and they just do their thing, it's just amazing. It's breathtaking. The scenery, the Badlands, with the Badlands drop back, and the drop back, it's incredible. And it's people people love it when you see them even along the loop road. There's a road that goes along the park. There's a lot of bands that'll be right by the road. That's where the backup of cars always is, wherever the horses are. And people just love watching them. We've seen people literally crying when they see horses, running
Mm,
across the landscape. It's a very moving experience. It's something that you don't get everywhere. And that's why, a lot of the EA talks about policy, and that's all just garbage, because we know they're not taking the horses from Assateague, right? They're not taking the horses from anywhere, any other national park. There's no collective, you know, campaign to get rid of horses in national parks, just this one. So if they can stay in the other national parks, they could stay here.
right, exactly. And especially if they have people who love to see them and it increases tourism.
Right.
So, what about the health of the range? I mean, obviously, that's something that I'm sure, it's always a thing that that any sort of range degradation gets blamed on wild horses, but I'm
Well, they
imagining
did
that,
that in the EA. Yes, they
yes,
did that in the EA. But what's interesting is when you read that 2022 document, because they were blaming the horses for archaeological damage, damage to archaeological sites throughout the park. In that 2022 document, they say they know the bison are damaging different archaeological sites. I
right.
thought you were blaming the horses. I thought it was just the horses doing it. So that's why that other document is really important for people to read. But the park we know has nutrient rich soils. There is plenty of forage in the park. We've been very blessed the last couple of years. Uh, the grasses were still very green, I think, through September in the park, like beginning of October, because we've had a good amount of rain that's been keeping everything moist. The grass is higher than I've ever seen it in the 7 years that we've been out here. There is more than enough forage. The other thing that was mentioned in the EA that they added to the purpose and need statement was needing to comply with the Bison Initiative. So we asked about that at the civic engagement meeting they had. They currently have over 700 bison in the park.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's a lot.
Um, their target number is 3 to 500.
Okay.
They're currently in the process this week of rounding up 400 bison. They'll give away to tribes, zoos, they'll be sold for meat, whatever. So this isn't a case of, more bison, less horses equal more bison. They're over on that also. And the bison herd, I might add, is also inbred. Um, the horses were fenced into the park in the 40s. The
Okay.
bison were reintroduced in the 50s. The elk were reintroduced in the 70s.
Hmm.
But the horses are not native and the bison and the elk are. I mean, it's so I just call this toilet paper math, right? I don't know why I can't go to the store and know that I'm buying 6 rolls of toilet paper and actually getting six. I don't know why it has to say 6 equals 12, right? I don't understand. And I don't understand half of what they say
Right.
because it doesn't make sense. So what we said, and we encouraged people to send an email to Secretary Holland, because this is out of her secretary's order, this bison initiative and this restoration of the prairie. Theodore Roosevelt National Park's doing that, right? They brought bison back in the 50s. Good job, Theodore Roosevelt National Park. You brought bison back to the ecosystem. Way to go. We know it's a healthy ecosystem. So good job again. Nowhere in that initiative does it say that you can't have wild horses. So I
Right.
think that she needs to let them know, hey, good job. You're in compliance. Let the horses stay because they are equally culturally important to the Native Americans, especially the ones in North Dakota where we have the horse nation. I mean, um, and they are trying to dismiss the cultural and historical significance of this herd.
Right. Have you gotten the tribes involved with this?
The MHA Nation did do their own resolution asking the park to keep the horses. The United Tribes of North Dakota came out in January and said, we support the governor and his act because our governor offered them anything they can do to keep the horses. We support Governor Burgum. We think the horses should stay in the park. I
That's
know you
great.
offered them to us. We don't want them. Keep them where they are. Um, and then the other thing that I found out just last week is our state historic preservation office, whenever there's a federal action like this, they have to investigate. So we didn't know they were doing an investigation. And I said, okay, I said, so can we get the horses listed as a historical and cultural significance to the state of North Dakota? And he said, that's what we're trying to find out now. It hasn't ever happened where like an animal was, but they're looking into it with their lawyers. And a very big key, and became a call to action last week, the public gets to weigh in on that. So if people will send a letter, just send a snail mail letter into the historic preservation officer in Bismarck, they're actually looking at this right now. And this is somewhere where you can have some weight because if we can prove these horses are a historical or cultural significance,
Yes.
then that creates another hurdle for the park to try to get around and
Right.
some strength to keeping the horses in the park.
And I saw on your website it says that you need to send a actual snail mail letter
Yes.
and you
Yes.
have all the information about where to send it and everything like that on the
Yes.
website.
Yes.
The website is great. All of
Thank
the
you.
information about what to do and what actions that you could possibly take is there. And I'll repeat it at the end too, but it's chwa.org. And
chwha.org, right?
chwha.org. Yes. And that's where you're going to be able to find all the information about how to comment. And the comment period may be extended. We'll find out
Correct.
soon, hopefully, because
Right.
it's supposed to end on the 25th.
Yes.
And because all those documents were so late to get into the public view, they really need to extend the comment period.
Right. Especially in light of all the discrepancies that we're finding in the facts that they gave us in the EA.
Right, right, right. So, uh, yeah, I was, the Gonacon thing is just unbelievable. And also the fact that there was no public comment before they started this study
Right.
is
No.
really unbelievable.
Well, and the other thing too is that in 2020, the former superintendent, Wendy Ross, signed a categorical exclusion allowing them to give Gonacon to every female horse 8 months old and up. That should not be a categorical exclusion.
No, it should have been an environmental assessment. It should have been up for
Correct.
public comment. There
Yes.
is no way it should have just been slipped in there without the public knowing.
Right.
And then, as we mentioned, this is going to be used. The Gonacon is going to be used in all of the herds administered by the BLM in 10 Western states now. And so the fact that there's just that there that they didn't ask for public comment, and then now it's the new thing that they say is like the solution,
But we
is
also
just,
have that video with Dan Baker on our YouTube channel.
oh, that's
And
great.
he really believes, like, I think if you asked him, and we didn't ask that question, but you can take away from the conversation, he supports that more research needs to be done,
Right,
especially on the things like he said, there is no science to prove what the BLM is doing right now. There is no science that backs that.
right, right. But they're just including this on all the new EAs. So,
Right.
yeah. Um, what else can you think of that people should know?
I just think that reading Dr. Castle McLaughlin's report talks a lot about not only the historical significance of this herd, but the history of the park and the general view of these horses. And she had access to any documents they had within the National Park Service, and she shared a lot of them in that report. And it's crazy. At one point they were giving the horses succinylchlorine. They were, trying to bait them with hay and putting that in there, and the horses didn't eat it. The bison ate it. I mean, the lengths that they went through over time to try to get rid of these horses is so crazy, and it makes no sense.
No,
You know?
no, it doesn't. And, I noticed, there was public outcry so many times
Yes,
because people have always loved the horses in the park.
right, right. I think that people have the misconception that with all the support that we have, that the horses are saved, and they're not. We're still. I mean, the EA shows that.
Right.
Um,
Well, just because the governor and all of your state officials want to save the horses doesn't mean they'll be saved.
well, the interesting thing is that Senator Hoeven, our federal senator, is on the Appropriations Committee. So he did what every wild horse advocate wants, right? He put language in the appropriations bill for the Department of Interior saying, we strongly suggest you keep these horses in the park. And the implication, of course, is that if they don't, good luck getting your budget passed next year. And they came out with this EA anyway.
Right.
I mean, the just the ego involved here is just absolutely incredible, and the case to really get rid of these horses. And like I said, that 2022 document really feeds and gives you like some backstory on exactly how calculated this is for
Right.
them to try to get rid of these horses.
And, you know, you have partners and people who would be interested in helping manage the horses
Correct.
if the horses are kept in the park. That's the really
Yes.
sad thing. It's like
Right.
there are people who are willing to help. It's not like they're just saying, oh, Park Service, you just keep them there and we're not going to help you. There's been,
No, Governor Burgum offered them any resources available within the state of North Dakota. The other thing too, I mean, that's even financial. The state of North Dakota has their own bank. So the state of North Dakota is in a healthy place financially. And if it's, and we've asked, that's another question, I guess, too, is we have asked them what the total cost of ownership of this herd is. They won't answer that.
Mm,
If it costs so much, what is that amount?
right.
Because the
Yeah.
state of
What?
North Dakota will probably give it to you. What is that amount?
Right. Like, how much does it cost to go administer birth control to these
Right.
horses?
Right. But
Right.
there's volunteers that are willing to do that too, you know?
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah. And that makes it much better because usually the volunteers would know the horses better. And
right,
then you could have a database on all the horses and manage them and
right,
know exactly how many there are and everything like that.
right. And who they've been giving it to, because we don't even know if
Right.
they know who they're giving the Yanacon to. They're going by descriptions or whatever they're using, but they're not people that know the horses as well as advocates in the park.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, I really appreciate your coming on and talking about these horses because they are really a national treasure and certainly a
They are.
state treasure, and they deserve to be preserved for future generations and not just wiped out because the Park Service has decided they're inconvenient. And you can find I ask everybody to go to their website chwha.org because there you can find out where you can write a letter to the historical society. You can find out where you can send an email to Deb Holland and where you can comment on the EA and all the talking points. And then all the documentation that you could possibly want is on there to inform you. So I ask everybody to get involved. And the comment period is supposed to end on 10/25. We're hoping it gets extended, but so it's really good if you can get your comments in immediately.
Right. And the other thing too, just to remind people, there were just under 20,000 comments in the last public comment period. And you could probably speak to when was the last time you saw that on the Western Range.
Right,
Um, but when you sign on to form letters, when you just make a very vague, I won't come back to the park if you remove the horses, those statements, things like that dwindled that 20,000 down to 5 or 7,000 unique comments. And
right.
that's what they're looking for.
Unique,
So we have a lot,
unique, personalized comments
right,
in your own words.
that,
That's what we want.
that give factual and scientific, that have that scientific and factual data, because that's what they're looking for. Even if we feel like they're not giving us that, we need to give it back to them. It strengthens our argument. So
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being on. I really appreciate it.
thank you. I appreciate it. It was very nice to meet you, and I appreciate the time.